Imagine for a moment that your life is a movie and your thoughts are the script. If you don't like the scene you're standing in, the first place to look is not outside, not at your job, not at your past, not at the people around you, but at the thoughts you've been rehearsing in the silence of your own mind. Because here's the truth. You don't just have thoughts. Your thoughts are shaping you. They're molding your character, your confidence, your expectations, and your future. And while the world is busy telling you what you can't do, your mind has the power to create something different, something bigger, something better. The question is not, what are you looking at? The real question is, what are you thinking about? Because sooner or later, you become what you think. Your dominant thoughts quietly shape your identity and future in ways most people never fully recognize. Every day, we think tens of thousands of thoughts, and although many seem harmless or insignificant, they accumulate and quietly influence who we become. The human mind is always building, always forming, always absorbing. It is shaping your beliefs, your expectations, your self-image, and your sense of what is possible. Whether you are conscious of it or not, your life is steadily moving in the direction of your most consistent thoughts. The most powerful transformation in life doesn't begin with money, opportunity, or someone finally giving you a chance. It begins with a shift in thinking. Many people spend their lives trying to change what is happening on the outside, jobs, relationships, environments, habits, without ever examining the thoughts that built those outcomes in the first place. Your thinking is the architect. Your life is the construction. If the blueprint is flawed, the structure will be unstable, no matter how much effort you put into rebuilding the exterior. The truth is, we don't act based on who we want to be. We act based on who we believe we are. Thought leads identity, and identity leads behavior. A person who thinks they are unworthy, inadequate, or incapable will subconsciously make choices that reflect those beliefs. They may turn down opportunities, sabotage progress, or shrink in moments where they should stand tall, not because they truly can't succeed, but because their internal narrative never gave them permission to. On the other hand, a person who believes they are capable, resourceful, and deserving will move differently. They approach challenges with resilience, see failure as data instead of defeat, and step into opportunities even when they feel unprepared. The difference isn't luck, talent, or background. It is mindset. Your thoughts also determine what you notice in the world. Picture two people walking down the same street, one focused on scarcity, one focused on opportunity. The first may see risk, obstacles, unfairness, and evidence that the world is working against them. The other may notice possibilities, new chances, inspiration, and open doors. Both people are looking at the same reality, but they don't see the same thing. Why? Because the brain filters life through the lens your dominant thoughts create. We notice what we're trained to look for. A person who thinks mostly negative thoughts will be highly skilled at spotting reasons why success is impossible. A person who thinks with expectation and hope will be highly skilled at seeing why the future is still promising. This mental filtering doesn't just affect perception, it affects decision making. Your thoughts help decide what you attempt, what you pursue, what you give up on, and what you never even try. Most people are not limited by actual impossibility. They are limited by thoughts that tell them not to begin. The great tragedy is not that people aim too high and miss. It's that they aim too low and accept a life far smaller than they were created for. Consider how many successes, inventions, or breakthroughs in history began as thoughts someone allowed themselves to believe in. The airplane started as a thought. The light bulb started as a thought. Businesses, movements, books, careers, new lives, all of them were born from the internal permission to believe something greater was possible. If the mind had rejected those ideas early, the world would never have seen the results. The same is true in your life. There are dreams, abilities, and possibilities within you right now waiting on one thing: a shift in your thinking. Another way dominant thoughts shape our lives is through repetition. The brain learns through patterns. When you think the same thing consistently, the mind turns it into an assumption and eventually an identity. Think, I'm not smart enough often enough, and soon it doesn't feel like a thought, it feels like the truth. Think, I can learn anything I need to consistently, and you build a mindset that supports growth instead of shutting it down. Repetition is one of the most powerful forces in psychology. When you repeatedly feed the mind negative, doubtful, or fear-based thoughts, they eventually harden into mental cement. But the opposite is equally true. Feed your mind thoughts of purpose, confidence, strength, creativity, and possibility, and those thoughts become the foundation of a stronger, more empowered identity. Dominant thoughts also influence our emotional experience. Thoughts and emotions are partners. The thoughts you rehearse determine the feelings you cultivate. Someone who constantly thinks fearful thoughts will often live in anxiety. Someone who rehearses gratitude regularly will live in more peace and contentment. It is not life itself that produces most of the emotional experience. It is the interpretation of life that does. Two people can go through the same situation and feel completely different emotions because their thoughts about the situation are different. When you control your thoughts, you greatly influence your emotional quality of life. Your dominant thoughts can even shape relationships. If you think people are generally untrustworthy, you may treat others with distance, suspicion, or guardedness. In response, they may act in ways that confirm what you believed. On the other hand, if you think people are generally good, supportive, and valuable, your interactions will often build healthier and more fulfilling connections. The mind influences not only how you see people, but also how people experience you. One of the most overlooked truths about thinking is that thoughts are optional. Many people live as if thoughts are something that simply happen to them, like weather patterns, rather than something they can accept, reject, challenge, or replace. But the moment you realize you are the observer of your thoughts, not the prisoner of them, you take back incredible power. You cannot always control the first thought that appears, but you can always control the second thought, the follow-up thought, and the thoughts you allow to stay. Mastering your thinking is not about never having negative thoughts. It is about choosing which thoughts get to stay and define you. Developing strong, empowering thinking takes time, but every transformation does. You are rewiring mental pathways and building new internal habits. But every day you choose beliefs that support your potential instead of restrict it, you move closer to the future you are capable of living. The mind will build something either way. The question is whether it will build something small and limiting or something expansive and aligned with your purpose. Your dominant thoughts are leaders and your life is following them. If you want your future to look different, your thoughts must become change. Your thinking and your identity will evolve. Change your identity and your behavior will follow. Change your behavior consistently and your future will become the natural result of who you have allowed yourself to become. Negative thinking builds invisible barriers. Positive thinking opens new paths. Most people understand this concept on the surface, but few realize how deeply and silently this plays out in everyday life. Negative thoughts rarely announce themselves with dramatic force. They don't usually show up shouting, "I am here to limit your destiny." Instead, they slip in quietly, disguised as caution, logic, memory, or self-protection. Left unchallenged, they begin constructing emotional walls, mental ceilings, and psychological boundaries that keep people from stepping into greater possibilities. Over time, those invisible limits begin to feel like reality instead of belief. What begins as a thought eventually becomes a boundary that controls decisions, shapes identity, and restricts what a person believes they are capable of achieving. One of the biggest problems with negative thinking is that it feels true. If a person has failed in the past, a thought like "maybe I'm not good enough" can feel like wisdom instead of self-sabotage. But negative thinking is not a reflection of truth. It is a reflection of unprocessed experiences, disappointments, fears, and assumptions. Someone who has experienced rejection may begin to think they are unworthy of love. Someone who grew up in poverty may think wealth is only for others. Someone who made mistakes in the past may think success is not for them anymore. These thoughts are not factual barriers, but emotional ones. They do not represent reality, they shape reality. Negative thoughts influence behavior long before a person even realizes it. When someone believes a situation won't work out, they may put in less effort, take fewer risks, or avoid opportunities altogether. The thought becomes a filter through which they process life. It is not the outside world closing doors. It is the internal narrative refusing to open them. Many people are not losing battles in the world, they are losing battles in their minds before they ever step onto the field. They are standing behind invisible cages made of doubt, fear, insecurity, and internal criticism, convinced those walls are permanent when they were only ever mental constructs. The human brain is designed to protect us, to keep us safe. But when fear dominates thinking, the mind begins to protect us not just from danger, but from growth. Growth always carries risk, the risk of failure, embarrassment, difficulty, or discomfort. Fear interprets that risk as a threat and warns us to stay small, stay quiet, stay still. That is how negative thinking becomes the architect of stagnation. What feels safe becomes suffocating. What feels protective becomes limiting. What feels like caution becomes self-imposed confinement. Positive thinking, contrary to what some believe, is not naive optimism that ignores reality. True positive thinking is a decision to view opportunities as bigger than obstacles, to believe that solutions exist even when they are not visible, and to hold on to possibility when circumstances feel restrictive. Positive thinking shifts the question from what if it doesn't work to what if it does. That single change in mindset can reshape the decisions a person makes and the life that follows. One of the most powerful effects of positive thinking is the way it changes how the brain searches for answers. When someone thinks negatively, the brain looks for evidence to support the negative belief. If you think I can't do this, the brain will scan your history to pull up every failure, every setback, and every imperfect moment. But when you think there must be a way, the brain shifts into problem-solving mode. It starts looking for solutions, resources, opportunities, and strategies. Positive thinking activates creativity, innovation, and resilience. Negative thinking activates fear, avoidance, and paralysis. This difference determines how a person responds to challenges. The same setback can make one person quit and another person fight harder. The difference is not in the challenge, but in the thoughts surrounding it. Someone with negative thinking sees a closed door and believes the journey is over. Someone with positive thinking sees the same closed door and looks for another entrance, a window, a key, or a new idea. Positive thinking doesn't remove obstacles, it expands the mind until the obstacles no longer feel impossible. Positive thinking also expands emotional capacity. Negative thoughts drain energy. They create stress, worry, frustration, and hopelessness. When a person spends mental energy constantly imagining grief, loss, and disappointment, they have little emotional strength left to pursue progress. But positive thinking fuels emotion. It energizes, motivates, and strengthens. Believing that something is possible fills a person with the drive needed to attempt it. No one has ever built something great while thinking, this will probably fail. Great achievements are born from thoughts that support courage, not thoughts that shrink possibility. Another powerful impact of positive thinking is its effect on how people see themselves. Negative thinking leads to a small self-image. Someone who constantly criticizes their abilities soon believes they are limited beyond repair. They stop trying not because they lack ability, but because they believe ability doesn't matter. Failure is the assumed outcome. Positive thinking, however, expands identity. When a person begins to believe that they can learn, grow, improve, and rise, their behavior aligns with that belief. They take steps forward. They ask for opportunities. They develop skills. they become more proactive than reactive. Over time, their life begins to reflect the new identity that positive thinking created. Some people believe that their environment or circumstances hold them back. But the most powerful danger is not the obstacles outside, it is the defeated mindset within. There are countless examples of people who rose out of poverty, hardship, trauma, illness, or injustice and achieved great things, not because they had perfect conditions, but because they refused to accept a negative narrative. Their external breakthroughs began with internal breakthroughs. Before life changed, their thinking changed. They chose to believe something greater was possible. That belief opened the path. Positive thinking also improves relationships. When someone approaches people with trust, openness, and goodwill, they often build deeper and more supportive connections. Negative thinking, however, breeds suspicion, defensiveness, and isolation. Many relational conflicts begin not with external actions, but with internal assumptions. A thought like, people always let me down, can make someone hyper defensive or emotionally distant. They begin living a self-fulfilling prophecy. Positive thinking is not about being blind to reality. It is about choosing a mindset that gives relationships the room to thrive instead of die before they start. Another essential truth is that positive thinking must be cultivated intentionally. Negative thinking is natural. The brain gravitates toward fear, protection, and worst-case scenarios as a survival mechanism. Positive thinking is a decision, a discipline, and a practice. It requires paying attention to the thoughts that arise and choosing which ones deserve influence. It means challenging internal dialogue instead of accepting it as truth. It means replacing thoughts of limitation with thoughts of possibility repeatedly until new patterns are formed. Thoughts are seeds. Negative thoughts plant weeds that choke out growth. Positive thoughts plant roots that support expansion. Whatever we feed grows. If we feed doubt, doubt grows. If we feed possibility, possibility grows. Life is not simply shaped by what we experience, but by how we think about what we experience. When someone builds a consistent habit of positive thinking, something powerful happens. Their environment begins to reflect their internal shift. New opportunities appear. New relationships emerge. New ideas unfold. This is not magic. It is the natural consequence of a mind that is no longer standing in its own way. Negative thinking closes doors that never needed to be closed. Positive thinking opens paths that always existed but were previously unseen. In every season of life, thoughts are building. The question is not whether the mind is constructing something. The question is what it is constructing. Through awareness and intention, a person can replace invisible barriers with invisible bridges. They can transform obstacles into opportunities. They can reject the fear that keeps them small and embrace the optimism that leads them forward. In the end, the difference between standing still and moving forward begins with the simple choice of which thoughts we empower. Transforming your life begins with transforming your inner narrative. Most people spend years trying to change circumstances, waiting for external events to align, or hoping someone else will hand them success, happiness, or purpose. But the truth is, lasting transformation doesn't come from what happens outside, it comes from what happens inside. Your inner narrative, the story you tell yourself about who you are, what you deserve, and what is possible, shapes your beliefs, decisions, actions, and ultimately your results. Until you confront and rewrite that story, your life will remain limited by the invisible scripts running in your mind. The inner narrative begins forming early in life, often before we are fully conscious. It is influenced by family, culture, education, peers, and experiences. Each compliment, criticism, victory, or failure contributes to a mental story about who we are. I am capable. I am not enough. The world is against me, or I can figure things out. These are not just fleeting thoughts. They are the building blocks of identity. Over time, repeated thoughts become beliefs. Beliefs shape behaviors, and behaviors solidify patterns that dictate the course of life. If the story inside your head is limiting, your actions will naturally follow those limitations, often without you realizing it. Many people fail to recognize that the inner narrative can be rewritten. They believe the story they have is fixed, that their past defines them, or that their personality and abilities are unchangeable. This misconception keeps them trapped in cycles of mediocrity, self-doubt, or fear. The key truth is that while you cannot change every circumstance in life, you can change how you interpret those circumstances. You can choose which thoughts to nurture and which ones to challenge. You can actively edit the story you tell yourself every day, replacing limiting beliefs with empowering ones, doubt with confidence, fear with courage, and scarcity with possibility. The inner narrative also determines how we interpret challenges and setbacks. Two people can experience the same event, yet their internal story can create entirely different outcomes. One might see failure as evidence of inadequacy, while the other sees failure as feedback, as a necessary part of growth. The narrative shapes not just what we do, but how we feel about what we do. Negative self-talk, even when subtle, can paralyze initiative and motivation. Positive, intentional self-talk encourages action, resilience, and learning. By transforming your inner narrative, you create a mindset that supports progress instead of resistance. Rewriting the inner narrative begins with awareness. Many people live unconsciously, allowing automatic thoughts to dictate their identity and actions. They repeat old stories. I'll never be good enough. I'm unlucky. I can't succeed, without realizing they are self-sabotaging. Awareness requires pausing, observing the thoughts running in your mind, and asking, is this story serving me or is it holding me back? It is the moment of choice when you can begin to challenge assumptions, question old beliefs, and decide which stories deserve to stay. Awareness is the first step toward reclaiming control over your inner world. The next step is to intentionally replace limiting beliefs with empowering narratives. This requires consistency, repetition, and practice. Just as muscles grow stronger through exercise, the mind grows stronger through repeated intentional thought. If your narrative has been dominated by self-doubt, fear, or resignation, simply deciding to think positively once is not enough. You must consistently feed your mind with thoughts, affirmations, and perspectives that reinforce your worth, potential, and purpose. Over time, the new narrative becomes the default, replacing old patterns that no longer serve you. Another critical element is integrating gratitude and perspective into your inner narrative. A story focused solely on lack, disappointment, or injustice narrows vision and limits action. Gratitude shifts the narrative from scarcity to abundance. It helps you recognize the resources, strengths, and opportunities already present in your life, even when external circumstances are challenging. Perspective allows you to see setbacks not as permanent failures, but as temporary detours or lessons that support your growth. Both gratitude and perspective reshape your internal story to one that encourages resilience and forward motion. Transforming the inner narrative also involves taking responsibility for your thoughts and their impact. Many people blame external factors for their struggles, bad luck, unfair circumstances, or other people's actions. While it is true that external forces influence life, the inner narrative determines whether these influences defeat you or propel you forward. Two people can face identical challenges but experience vastly different outcomes because of the story they carry internally. Taking responsibility for your thoughts is empowering it, is a recognition that while you may not control every event, you control how you think about them, and that shapes your actions, feelings, and outcomes. Action is the natural consequence of a transformed inner narrative. Once the mind accepts a new story about possibility, capability, and growth, behaviors align with that story. Confidence replaces hesitation. Courage replaces fear. Initiative replaces stagnation. Transformation is not just a mental exercise. It is reflected in tangible changes in habits, decisions, relationships, and life direction. The inner narrative fuels action, and action reinforces the narrative. This creates a powerful cycle. Thoughts shape actions, actions validate beliefs, and beliefs shape even more powerful actions. Transformation through inner narrative also changes how people respond to adversity. Life is inevitably filled with challenges, setbacks, and disappointments. Those with an old, limiting narrative often interpret adversity as proof that they are destined to fail. Those with a transformed narrative interpret adversity as a temporary challenge, an opportunity to learn, or a signal to adjust strategies. A resilient inner narrative does not deny the difficulty of circumstances, but empowers the individual to face challenges with clarity, determination, and hope. It builds mental and emotional resilience, which is essential for sustained personal growth. Relationships are another area deeply impacted by the inner narrative. How you see yourself affects how you engage with others. Someone with a limiting story may struggle with trust, communication, or asserting boundaries. Someone with an empowered narrative interacts from a place of confidence, empathy, and clarity, fostering healthier, more authentic connections. The inner narrative acts as a lens through which we perceive and interact with the world, affecting not just personal success, but the quality of our relationships, influence, and leadership. It is important to note that transforming the inner narrative is not about perfection or denial of reality. It is not about pretending everything is ideal or that challenges do not exist. It is about actively choosing a story that empowers rather than disempowers. It is about seeing obstacles clearly but believing in your capacity to overcome them. It is about acknowledging past mistakes but refusing to be defined by them. Transformation begins with the deliberate choice to tell yourself a story that aligns with your highest potential, even if it initially feels uncomfortable or unfamiliar. The inner narrative also shapes long-term vision. A story dominated by fear, doubt, or limitation keeps people trapped in short-term thinking, reactive decisions, and survival mode. An empowered narrative encourages long-term thinking, strategic planning, and purposeful action. It helps individuals see beyond immediate setbacks to the bigger picture, to the possibilities that require persistence, learning, and courage. Transformation at this level is not just about improving circumstances, it is about redesigning life according to intention, purpose, and potential. Finally, the transformation of your inner narrative is a lifelong process. Life continually challenges our beliefs, tests our resilience, and tempts us to revert to old patterns of thinking. That is why awareness, intentional thought, reflection, and realignment must be ongoing. Each day presents opportunities to reinforce the new story, to strengthen the beliefs that empower, and to discard those that limit. Transformation is not a one-time event, but a continual journey of refining, growing, and expanding who you believe you are and what you are capable of achieving. Ultimately, transforming your life begins with transforming your inner narrative, because who you believe you are, what you believe is possible, and how you interpret your experiences determine the quality of your decisions, the effectiveness of your actions, and the trajectory of your future. Change the story in your mind, and you change the life you live. Your thoughts are not just reflections of reality, they are the architects of your reality. By consciously crafting a narrative of strength, possibility, and purpose, you lay the foundation for a life that aligns with your highest potential. Your inner story is not just a part of you, it is the blueprint for everything you can become. So what does all of this mean for you? It means that your life right now is the product of your thoughts up to this moment. It means the story you're telling yourself, the thoughts you replay in your mind, the beliefs you cling to, the fears you let dominate are not just abstract ideas. They are shaping your identity, your decisions, your relationships, and the future you're building. But here's the good news. The power to change it all is already in your hands. The very thoughts that have been limiting you can be replaced. The inner narrative that has held you back can be rewritten. Negative patterns that built invisible barriers can be dismantled, and new paths of possibility can be created. You have the authority to decide which thoughts to feed, which beliefs to nurture, and which story you are going to live by. From this moment forward, you don't have to wait for permission. You don't have to wait for the perfect opportunity or the perfect circumstances. Change begins inside. Transform your thoughts and your life will follow. Expect more from yourself. Think bigger. Believe that you are capable. Speak life over your mind. Guard your mental space and step boldly into the reality of possibility. Because here's the ultimate truth. You do not merely live what happens to you. You live what you think. You become what you think. And when you take control of your mind, when you choose the thoughts that elevate, empower, and expand you, nothing can stop the life you were meant to live. Now go and start thinking in a way that builds a life worthy of your dreams. The power is in your mind, and the future is waiting for the thoughts you decide to nurture today.